Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CXO Central. We've been doing this for some time now and have really gotten a lot of knowledge. Today, it gives me a lot of pleasure because we are going into a different CXO today. We usually do CFOs and CEOs and COOs. Today, we are doing a CHRO. We are meeting Amit Chincholikar. He's the global CHRO at TATA Consumer Products, one of the biggest consumer products companies in the country. Okay guys, before we begin, here's a small message for you. As viewers of CXO Central, we know that you have big aspirations for your career. With this in mind, if you want to become advisors and truth tellers to some of the biggest CEOs in the world, then consulting is a great career option for you. Which is why Altuni brings in Consulting Festival for anybody who wants to get introduced to the world of consulting by some of the biggest names in consulting and embark on a very successful career. Details are in description. Now, let's get on with the interview. I want to start with a fundamental question, Amit. What is a typical day like for a global CHRO?
A general day perspective, I think there are four things that really happen. And I mean, consciously, I try and look at, making sure that, of course, there's a different balance between all of these as the day goes by.
Right.
But there is a lot of focus on getting stuff done, right? Or doing stuff yourself, which is around delivering outcomes, right? Now, there are multiple parts in multiple parts in HR, right? You've got learning, you've got hiring, you've got compensation, the whole employee engagement experience thing that you've kind of referenced. There is a view on policies, processes, how are things happening, etc. All of that on an ongoing basis. So I like to call that the 5 feet view that you have, right? You're very, very close to the ground and
Right.
you're working on making sure that there is an outcome that's delivered, right? And I mean, that becomes important because like every other function, you like to be measured on outcomes, right? So
Right.
it's not just so much the effort, but the outcomes that you deliver. So that's one part of the job. I think the other part of the job takes you to 50,000 feet, which is about what will the medium term or the long term look like. And over the last couple of years, I think we can safely say that medium term means maybe, this quarter, and long term
Right.
probably 6 months or maybe, a little bit
Right.
beyond that. But it's a little bit of thinking around, are we doing enough to invest in the future? Right? Are we doing something to make sure that what we are doing is sustainable? There is a third part of the job that I like to call as the listening part, right? And the listening part comes in when, like I said, there are so many stakeholders, right? And at the end of the day, your company is a brand. And the fourth piece is, something that I'd read that really inspired me to do a lot more of this is what I call as the 24-48 principle, right? And the 24-48 principle really is that a lot of decisions in an organization, including, I dare say, HR, get made in rooms where the ambient temperature is maintained at 24 degrees. Yeah. And then they get executed in the ground or at the ground where the temperature is 48 degrees. Right. And if we don't have visibility of what's happening at 48, I don't think we have the moral right to consider doing what we do at 24.
Okay, let's go back in time to when you were at InsideIIM and you were doing your MBA. How did you figure that, okay, HR is where I want to go, that's the road I want to take?
So actually, Kunj, in my case, that decision was actually taken before I stepped into campus, right? So now the reason why that happened was, just a couple of conversations that I had with colleagues, not with colleagues, but with parents of some very dear friends. And they were in HR, and it was there that I was first exposed to this whole wealth of nations theory that talked of the value of production coming from land, labor, capital, enterprise, right?
Right.
I still remember those words, and I was 19 when this conversation took place, right? But those words still stayed with me that said, and we were just into liberalization, right? So it was the early 1990s. And those words still stayed with me, right? That said that land, capital, and enterprise will continue to always be there. Over a period of time, each of these will vary in its relevance or its importance. Yeah. But it's the labor factor, which is eventually what we call as human capital, that kind of came into play, right? To be able to say, that this is kind of an important facet that one needs to think about. So that's where the decision kind of, in some ways got made. It got made for me, through these conversations. Did I know enough about what the discipline involved? I'll be honest, I did not.
Has this answer really changed to this question? What do employees want? You've been in the industry for the last 2 decades. Do you feel that that answer has evolved, or has it changed into something more complex today?
The one thing that has remained common is people would like to learn and grow, right? So they look for environments that allow them to learn. That's been a consistent factor, and that's why you'll find so much of leaning towards learning systems, training systems, etc. That particularly in HR you kind of tend to kind of call out. I think one very key thing that is now coming out, which is a little different from what we had earlier, is that people are demanding that they contribute, yeah, and therefore their contribution be seen and recognized. So in some ways, the concept of instant gratification, right? So very often you had this thing of giving feedback once a year,
Right.
having a conversation. Now the expectation is, and in my view, it's the right thing to do. There needs to be instant gratification and instant call out to say, hey, Amit, great job done. I like that. Or, hey, Kunj, that was fantastic. I didn't expect, that this would turn out to be as well.
Right.
So
Right.
I think this concept of positive strokes is coming out significantly more, which is what people kind of look for. I think the other is by the kind of quality of experiences that people have. Employees, as they come to the workforce, are becoming far more discerning. And what I mean by that is they are thinking about, do I want to join a company that cares about the environment? Do I want to look at a brand that thinks about the future, that regards community as being important? So what's happening is this whole angle of building in a social, sustainable, environmentally conscious way of life is something that is really important for people as they're coming in. That earlier we had this whole concept of saying, baby boomers, millennials, Gen X, Gen Y. Frankly, I think this is down to what I like to call as the N is equal to 1 experience, Kunj. And what it means is every individual is unique.
My next question is about your experience, Amit. You've worked in multinationals, and you've worked in a couple of the largest companies in the country today. What are some of the things that these two kinds of organizations can learn from each other?
Multinational corporations are, or Indian conglomerates. The way I like to define it is that both of these are multinational companies that happen to be headquartered in different parts of the world.
Right.
I think that's the key difference. Therefore, if you were to look at multinational corporations that, and you're right, I've had the privilege of working at a few of these. I think some things that they really bring in, and again, this is a reflection of the education system and the society that you grow up in, right?
Right. Right.
If you look at Western economies or Western geographies, you'll find few things. There is a great regard and respect for process.
Process.
Right?
Correct.
So which
Absolutely.
means anywhere that you go into the office of a multinational corporation that is there, the experience you're likely to have is exactly the same. Point number 2, I think multinational corporations do a great job on inclusivity and empathy. Again, if you look at it, that's the way the education system has been built, right? In these geographies, you learn through projects, you work cohesively, you do a lot of work that enables you to understand and take on board different people's point of view. So
Right.
it's built in your system from a very early age, right? So that's the second big benefit that comes. I think the third thing that comes is, and you can interpret it both ways, is that the nature of the employer-employee relationship tends to be a little transactional. And what
Right.
that means is work is part of your life. It's not your life. So you put in the effort that's there. The nature of your relationship is transactional. Till the time that you're doing your job well, you have a job. At a point of time, if it so works out that something else is happening, then you will, kind of want to move on. You will, take a decision. And people with whom this decision is also being taken understand why it's being taken. They may not agree with it. That's a separate
Right.
matter. So what I'm saying is that these are some characteristics that define how multinational corporations in some ways would work. Go back a little bit into our, let's say, education systems and our upbringing. There is a strong sense of competitiveness, right? I mean, while there is a little bit of this whole thing of
Yeah, because it's a zero-sum game, right? There are limited seats for everything, and you have to beat the guy next to you to get into it. So it's all about competition, rarely about collaboration in our education system.
So that aspect does remain, right? So there is
Yeah.
a strong sense of competitiveness. The advantage it brings is that you are naturally inclined to working incredibly hard. And I mean, there was an interesting study that came in that suggested that the reason why people need to stay gainfully employed after they retire, right? Particularly people who are retiring now because they worked like for 35, 40 years.
Right.
That is their identity. So if they don't do that, they go down a spiral that's very hard to kind of come up from.
Right. We
So
worry about what Sachin will do after 20 years of cricket because that's his entire identity. Imagine
honestly,
for people who've had like 40, 45 years long careers, and especially in organizations like Tata, where there are so many people who have those kinds of careers,
absolutely,
work
absolutely.
becomes their identity, right? Yeah.
So how is it that you are, so I mean, one thing that one needs to learn therefore is that work is not your identity, right? I mean, you're not defined by the designation or the chair you sit on or the size of the room that you're having. All that will be gone at some point in time. So it
Right.
is very, so I think one thing to really learn is to understand that work is part of your life. It's not life itself. That being said, I think finally every corporation needs to take a deep, hard look and look inside and figure out what is it that they stand for. Because in some ways, if you look at this, right, this is a matrimonial site. Yeah,
Yes,
there
correct.
are certain things that will match that work. There are certain things that will not match. Now, if you try to end up being somebody who you aren't, you will always have a problem.
Right.
So I think it's important for corporations, companies, be it Indian, be it multinational, to know what works for them, right? Because that is their strength. There are certain things that they can adapt to. And with that, when you take an action, there is a consequence, which means you will be
Right.
able to attract a certain kind of employees, right? I mean, why is it that investment banks, consulting firms attract certain kinds of employees? It's because what they are offering is attractive and lucrative to people who think in a particular way. It
Right.
works for them. Now the same people therefore will not be able to cut it, being able to kind of do something, something else,
Right.
in some ways or form. So I think being able to really know what you want to stand for and then recognize therefore that you should go after building your employer brand or your employee value proposition such that it appeals to people whose thinking matches yours, I think is where the answer
Right.
lies.
Right.
I think from the point of view of this whole Babugiri and all of that, I think Indian corporations have moved substantively faster. Yeah, significantly.
Yeah, it's just that organizations move faster, perceptions take a little longer to change.
Totally get that.
So
Totally get
I want to take you back to time when I was doing my MBA back in 2008, 2010. And, I had to write this thesis, and I wrote this thesis about brown capitalism, about how we became a colony for the United Kingdom for a long time, and now we are going to colonize United Kingdom, and Tetley being one of those examples, and JLR being another example, and then we also discussed how Chorus was going to be taken over, and all those sorts of things, and it made me realize that, and that's something you just pointed out recently, that uh, they are Indian multinationals. As a global CHRO, how do you build culture? So you've up till now been an Indian company, and when you acquire a foreign brand, you have to now figure out what am I going to take from this culture that I've built in this company into that brand, and also figure out what am I going to keep as is in that brand. So how do you approach those kinds of situations? And Tata is a big M&A player, so every time this happens, how do you approach it?
we were doing a three-way call,
Hmm.
through an acquisition that had just happened, and this
Hmm.
was some time ago,
Hmm.
wherein some of us were in India, there was somebody in Switzerland, and then there was somebody in the US, and we were supposed to do this call on a Friday evening, right? So I mean, it was fixed for Friday evening, 8 p.m. India time. No surprise, we are always
Right.
working, which was about 4:30, I think, Swiss time, and which was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon in the US, or 12:30 in the afternoon in the US. Now, for some reason, something was happening, and that call time seemed to kind of keep moving a little bit. So we first said okay 7:30, then we said 8, then we said 8:30, 8:45, etc. And our colleague in Switzerland said that you need to tell me when this is happening because I have to go skiing and I have to leave at 4 o'clock. And some on the other side of the call we are wondering, I mean, why would you want to go skiing on a Friday afternoon, right? I mean, what sense does it make? It's very hard to imagine, right? I mean,
Right.
And this, like I said, this was maybe like about a decade ago, at around the same time that you were writing the paper.
Right.
And things went on, and then someone from the Indian call, I mean, who was from India on the call, really said to this gentleman in Switzerland, saying, listen, this call is going to get extended and you may need to move your skiing trip or whatever, and whatever needs to happen.
Right.
Yeah. And this guy said, look, I don't think it's possible for me, etc. And then in our own way, in our typical way, we said, without using the words, we said, listen, we are the boss, we have acquired, so if you are telling you to wait, you have to wait, without using this language, right?
Right. Right.
And the next thing we know that is that this guy got off the call, he switched off his mobile, he put it into the drawer, he closed the drawer, and he left for the day. Right. And he moved on and he went on to do on his weekend what he had to do. And I learned a very important lesson at that point in time, right? Which is that, when we say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, this is
Right.
exactly what people mean, right? So if it doesn't matter whether you are the acquiring entity or the acquired entity. Yeah, you've got to establish a set of what we call as non-negotiables.
Right.
Yeah. And very often the non-negotiables that happen, unfortunately, so far, a lot of it focuses on the financials, right? This is how we will do reporting. This is how we will do numbers. This is how we'll present business. This is the review we'll set up for meetings, process,
Right.
all of which is the right thing to do. Because if you've invested your capital, you've got to have a view on how some of these things are going to deliver a return for you, right? However, this is a kind of collaboration you're seeking from India, where you have never been brought up to collaborate with a set of people for whom collaboration is in their DNA.
Right.
That's where the war of the worlds happens, right? So I think it's about recognizing that culturally there are certain things you should just never do. If you want to build a culture, you must recognize that values is not something that you place on a wall, right? Values is something that you have to live, practice, breathe every single day.
Right.
For example, in Tata Consumer, as we set up the new organization, right, one of the values on which we agreed on instantaneously was empathy. And by the way, when we developed our values, we didn't do it by sitting in a 24-degree room, right? We went out across the world and asked people, listen, this is what we are thinking. What's your view?
Right.
How do you think this pans out? Does this make sense? And empathy is something that resoundingly sat well with everyone. So I think the concept of being inclusive very often, I think, stands very, very important. And that's the biggest thing of your culture, which is that you can agree to disagree, and that's fine. But people should never suspect your intent. No, there is a very there is a term that we use in India colloquially, which is "mera wo matlab nahi tha." And that is what is the what I would say sare fasad ki jad,
Right.
because we judge ourselves by our intent and we judge everybody else by their
Other
actions.
words. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Right.
very, very conscious to know that your actions speak. So be very clear. I think the other thing is that very often, and HR folks, I think, are guilty of that, is you must try and keep things simple, right? Do it in words and language that people understand. If you
Right.
say, I'm doing a culture immersion exercise so that we will emerge on what is it that we are trying to do, etc., all of that, some people may get it, some people may not get it, but it's certain that not everyone will understand it the same way.
Our community of students, early career professionals who look at it as HR is not something that I want to start building my career in, because my long term game will not be that great. Right. Now, this is based on a lot of misperceptions and, confusions and, biases that people have. Can you take this platform today to help us clear some of these biases? Where do they come from, and how can we uproot these biases?
You would recall, and that is true even today, that the whole concept of what does human resources actually do is never discussed, let alone understood.
Right.
So I think it is partly lack of knowledge. It is basically lack of exposure that is there at an early stage when you're trying to make a decision. Like I said, I mean, how did my decision get made? It's because I spoke to two people who happened to be in the field. Otherwise, at age 19, I didn't know what human resources meant, right? We'd never heard of this.
Right.
So that is one challenge that kind of does exist. And I think it is in the interest of the profession to start having conversations with young people at an early stage for them to know that this is a choice that exists, right? And I think the good thing about young people today compared to 20 years ago is that they are intuitively much more bright, right? They
Right.
get it, they understand.
Right.
So you're trying to
Right.
explain something about what is it that human resources does, and you do it in a simple codified manner, people will get it. I think that's point number one. Point number two, I would say, maybe the profession itself is a little bit to blame, and it is played up a little bit more by stand-up comics, right? So I mean, look at the profession of HR. Essentially, you say these are the people who organize Rangoli competition at Diwali.
Right. That is the thing you hear most often about HR. Yeah.
And I think that is a reflection of how the people in the profession reflect the profession itself, right? Very often it's considered to be this dark box, black box, wherein, and this is in the age, like you said, Kunj, at a time when information is available no matter what for everybody. It's this black box of people who sit in a corner, work quietly,
Right.
use the term confidentiality for everything, don't provide you adequate information, data, etc. Quite frankly, the profession is far from that. Yeah. A lot of human resources success really depends on the amount of transparency that you're able to build in a system. I'm very passionate about theater as a medium. So maybe I'll use an example that talks
Sure.
about it. When you go to see a play, you will appreciate the artist who made it happen. And that's perfectly fine, right? But for that artist to come to life, there are 3 or 4 sets of people who you will never see, and they are content with you not seeing them. There is a script writer and a dialogue writer, who made those dialogues come to life. There is someone who's designed the set. There is someone who's composed the music. There is someone who's controlling the lights. And that's why I'm using a medium of theater as opposed to films, because theater is a very real medium, right? I mean, you have to do it right day after day after day. There is no concept of retake. So I think people should understand, and from an aspiration perspective, there is absolutely nothing wrong in wanting to be a script writer, in wanting to control lights, in wanting to do sets, and in wanting to do music. So I think as long as people understand what is it that they are more inclined to do, because at the end of the day, not everyone will become a CEO. Not everyone will be a marketing director. Yeah. The paths as they start going up will always converge. So I think the point is, HR doesn't mean that you are outside of the business. You are very much embedded in the business. You are there taking day-to-day decisions that impact the business. Yeah. You may not be involved in making money, and that's perfectly fine, right? In fact, there are certain like HR consulting firms, you're actually involved in making money as well.
Of course, absolutely.
But I think to be able to understand that, as the superheroes, come on center stage, you need to have somebody else who's sitting in the wings and quietly clapping. And if you are that person, then this profession is really meant for you. And there is tremendous joy. It gives you tremendous value. It allows you to really experience, business from as close a quarter as as is kind of needed. I mean, today, for example, in my role, or if you look at any of my colleagues that work in HR, if we profess to say we don't understand what e-commerce means or modern trade means, or how is it that business gets done, or what is a grade 33T versus a grade 43T, or why is it that our pulses are sold at a premium or whatever. Frankly, I have no right to be in the business.
Right.
When I say that, I mean I have no right to be in HR.
The value of HR that is there in an organization. Amit, thank you so much for doing this with us. I think this was a great meditation on the field of HR and the world of Tatas. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.